The Enterprise is in orbit around a barren, lifeless planet, but when one of the landing party beams back dead and then tells Kirk and crew that their ship is cursed in that order, they investigate and find that there's some kind of haunted house on the planet, and Sulu and Scotty are trapped somewheres inside. Grab your witch's hat and your Dracula cape as we rock the Catspaw. Hit it!
Hey!
Major guest stars this week. First, as Rob, we've got Theodore Marcuse. Theo was already pretty well known, mainly as a villain, and appeared in such shows as The Wild Wild West, Hogan's Heroes, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Batman, and The Untouchables, and showed up in movies like Elvis's Harem Scarum and The Cincinnati Kid, starring Steve McQueen. Sadly, Theo passed away in a car accident a mere month after his episode of Star Trek aired. Playing Korob's colleague, Sylvia, is Antoinette Bauer. Like Theo, Antoinette was already pretty well known, with guest spots in The Fugitive, Wild Wild West, Twilight Zone, and The Wackiest Ship in the Army, as well as movies like The Scorpio Letters and Mutiny on the Bounty. She would later go on to do such horror films as Die Sister Die, Prom Night, and Blood Song. But her long career would culminate in 42 episodes of Canadian dramatic series Neon Rider. But then who didn't know that, right? Well, those are our two guest stars, but there's one other face that shows up in this episode for the first time and will be with us to this very day. The final missing piece of the original series puzzle, as Pavel Andreevich Chekhov. Please give a huge watching stuff welcome to Walter Koenig. Despite playing 22-year-old Chekhov, Wally Boy was 30 when he first appeared on the Enterprise. And while he hadn't done a whole lot, his resume was still pretty impressive, with shots on The Untouchables, The Lieutenant, Gidget, and I Spy, but he would get tagged for Beam Up to the Enterprise by his work on the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, where he worked with Star Trek workhorse director Joe Pevney. That episode was Memo from Purgatory, and it was written by Harlan Ellison, and Walt here was playing opposite James Caan. When he found out they were looking for a young kid to play essentially a Russian version of the Monkees' Davy Jones, Pevney, who happened to be directing this episode, suggested Walt, and that was it. Koenig found out he got the part when Bill Tice came in to where Koenig was hanging out after he read for the role and started measuring him. According to Walt, he asked Tice what was going on, and Tice said, "Well, I gotta make you a uniform, you just got hired. The rest is history." But enough about that, let's get into the plot. We open our story already in orbit of some planet or other, and apparently there's a landing party what ain't checked in for a long time. We also learn that Scotty and Sulu are in that landing party. Don't know what they're supposed to be doing down there. Spock says there ain't any kind of life forms on the planet, but just then a Jackson calls to the ship and says he wants to beam up. Kirk asks what's been the problem, but Jackson don't seem to hear him and just keeps asking to beam up. Well, that's weird, so Kirk has McCoy meet him and Spock in the transporter room. We get to the transporter room, but I guess Spock had to hit the can on the way there or something, because other than Kyle, it's just Kirk and McCoy. Jackson beams in and immediately falls over dead. Not how that usually goes, especially since he's wearing a gold shirt. No! McCoy confirms he's a goner, but then Jackson opens his mouth and a weird voice comes out and says there's a curse on the ship, and they better leave or they're all gonna die. Kirk and McCoy seem to be handling that a dead dude just told them they're cursed remarkably well. After the opening credits, we get a recap of what we already know. Jackson is dead, Scotty and Sulu are missing, and that's it. Still don't know what planet this is or what the heck we're doing here. Kirk leaves DeSalle in command while he, Spock, and McCoy beam down. You remember DeSalle. He was the guy who kept trying and hilariously failing to murder Trelane that time. Yeah, he's in command now. Good luck with that. Anyways, the big three beam down to a planet that looks like it ought to have some murder monkeys running around on it, but it appears to be deserted. It's also foggy, which Spock says is weird. They walk around a bit, and Spock starts to get some life readings on the tricorder. Kirk calls up to the ship to see if they're seeing him too, and DeSalle strolls over to the science station where there's a Russian kid with borrowed hair running the gear. DeSalle asks what he's seeing, and he says they're still just getting the captain et al. Nothing else. Uhura tries to relay the message, but she's lost contact with the boys. On the planet, Kirk and team keep going toward the life readings, and they run into a vision of 3 witch-looking ladies in black turtlenecks getting their Macbeth on and using voices that are somewhere between spooky ghost noises and amateur opera. Basically, they say the same thing the dead guy said. If you don't leave, you're gonna die. Then they disappear. Weird. Anyways, moving on. After a very short windstorm mildly inconveniences the guys, they come across a castle, which doesn't really surprise anyone. You can't swing a dead tribble without hitting half a dozen castles in this part of the galaxy for some reason. They step inside and come across a really cheesed off black cat. It yells at them for a bit and then runs off. I think I dated her in college. Anyways, they start searching the castle. Well, up on the ship, the Russian wig tells DeSalle that Kirk and team just disappeared, just like Sulu and Scotty did. DeSalle says people don't just disappear. And before the bold Kutchevik can point out that there are 4 transporters on the ship, DeSalle orders him to recalibrate the sensors. But more importantly, we finally have a name for Ensign Improbable Hair, Mr. Chekhov. Hold for applause. DeSalle tells Chekhov and Uhura to keep looking for the people. Down in the castle, the big 3 are trudging along, still looking for those life signs. Other than the cat, I guess. But as they're strolling along, all 3 of them fall through the floor to the level below and get knocked out. The cat comes back to knock a vase down on their heads. Cats, am I right? When they come to, they're chained up in a dungeon. McCoy takes notice of a skeleton that's chained up next to him, and Kirk points out that all of this is Earth stuff. Halloween imagery. What the hell? Spock postulates that whoever set this up must have insight into what scares humans the most on an instinctive level. The monsters, apparently. Just then, the door to the dungeon opens up, and Scotty and Sulu walk in like extras from The Walking Dead. Scotty has a phaser, and Sulu has some comically enormous keys. Kirk tries to talk to him, but nothing doing. McCoy thinks they're drugged. Sulu releases them from the manacles, and as they're getting marched out of the cell, they ambush Sulu and Scotty, and almost instantly they're teleported to a large dining room where a bald dude in wizard robes is sitting in a needlessly elaborate chair. The wizard starts talking about, why are you Earth people so resistant and curious and crap? Why can't you just accept that there's a haunted house on a planet light years from the nearest Spirit Halloween store? Kirk says, because you killed a guy. And what the hell did you do to Sulu and Scotty? Well, Tor Johnson with an English degree over here says they're just controlled, Captain Kirk. Yeah, I know your name. What you think about that? Scary, right? Kirk is like, well, it's weird, but what is with you and the Scooby-Doo shtick? Are you one of them, what you call, LARPers or whatever? He says, that's none of your business, but my name is Korob. Kirk asks what gives with the mumbo-jumbo. That's not me, that's what he actually calls it. Korob checks with the cat and then says, no, it ain't mumbo-jumbo. This dude just keeps getting weirder. Spock points out that the planet which we learn is Pyres 7 ain't never had no life on it. So what are you doing here? Korob says, so we ain't from around here. What of it? He talks to the cat again, and it apparently tells him that he needs to serve up some grub. So when he goes over to the dining table, they wonder what the hell is with the cat. Spock says it's like a wizard and his familiar. Demon in animal form, he says. According to legend, anyway. Well, haunted hayride Calhoun over here hits the table with his magic light bulb stick, and before you can say presto changeo, there's food all over the table. The guys have a seat, but Kirk says they ain't gonna eat until they get some answers. Korob says, well, if you don't like food, how's about I give you a plate of precious jewels? Before you can say alakazam, all of their plates get bedazzled with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, the whole crayon box of fancy rocks. Korob says they're real, and you can have them all if you go away. Kirk points out that they ain't special no more. They can replicate this stuff on the ship with no problem now. Old Frankenberry has apparently got some out-of-date information. Not that the mummy inflatables and whatnot didn't already give that away. Well, trying to save face, Korob says, well, I was just testing yous. You passed. The classic scare them with Walmart stuff, then tempt them with food, then tempt them with diamonds test. Well done. Congratulations. The cat has something to say again and then leaves the room. And just as it leaves the room, a woman comes in with even more improbable hair than the Russian kid. Korob introduces her as Sylvia. Korob and Sylvia. She explains that what they did to Scotty and Sulu was mind-probing, kind of like hypnosis. She also says humans are a simple bunch, so it's easy to do crap like that to you guys. As she's explaining more stuff, Kirk throws a handful of diamonds at Scotty and snatches his phaser. And then to add insult to injury, he shoves Scotty across the room for no reason. Sheesh, what a grouch. And Kirk says, for the friggin' 9th time, I want some answers. Sylvia says, yeah? Well, how about this? And she holds up an Eagle Moss Classic Enterprise die-cast metal model, what's on a chain. She says it's basically a voodoo doll, and that she did the same thing with Jackson. Kirk don't buy it, but Sylvia gives him back his communicator and says, yeah, we'll call up your boys. Ask him what's going on up there. Then she puts the model of the ship in the flame of a candle. Korob clearly don't like what's going on here. Well, Kirk calls up the ship and says, hey, what's new with you guys? DeSalle says, we're boiling like a dirty water dog up here. Chekhov says the temp's gone up 60 degrees in the last 30 seconds. If it don't stop soon, we're going to be the USS Jiffy Pop up here. Kirk says, fine, you win, knock it off. He takes the model ship from Sylvia and hands over his phaser. Korob seems almost apologetic and tries to make conversation, being all, so, what kind of stuff do you guys have for science things? Kirk don't want to talk about his science, though. He wants to know more about how K and S are doing what they're doing. Korob starts to explain, but Sylvia cuts him off. McCoy asks how they knew that keeping Scotty and Sulu would make them come looking for him. And Korob starts to explain that they didn't have to know because Scotty and Sulu knew, and Sylvia goes off again. She don't want Korob talking about their stuff. But Kirk says that since he's talked to the ship, they're going to send a search team. So, party's over. Korob says, I wouldn't count on it. And he uses his light bulb stick to put the little Enterprise model in a block of lucite. A quick cut to Chekhov, and he says there's suddenly a force field around the ship. No idea where it came from, but they can't do squat about it. They're stuck. Well, Korob tells the catatonic duo to stick the boys back in the cooler until they agree to talk, but Sylvia says Bones needs to stick around. Up on the ship, DeSalle starts trying to break the ship out of the force field. Hope that works out for him. Cut to the dungeon, and Kirk and Spock are back in the shackles. Spock is pointing out that in trying to scare humans, they were only able to read what people are subconsciously scared of. Ghosts, black cats, great pumpkins, and whatnot. Plus, they were surprised that the food and the jewels didn't work. So they ain't really doing that great at the mind-reading thing. They don't seem to know squat about actual science, which is weird since they got to the planet somehow, and they called Kirk and the boys creatures. But they also look like humans, so maybe that means they don't actually look like that, and it's an illusion like the rest of this stuff. Well, just then, McCoy comes in with Scotty and Sulu, and he's doing the zombie thing now, too. Well, great. They release the captain and march him out of the dungeon. We cut to the dining room again, and we're in the middle of an argument between Korob and Sylvia. Korob is protesting that Sylvia is a traitor, and that she's forgotten, quote, what they were sent here for. Sylvia says she don't care. She likes being a human because she can touch stuff and feel crap and enjoy luxury. Says they don't have that kind of thing back home. Korob says they have a duty to the old ones, whatever the hell that means, and that torturing and killing their study subjects is wrong. Sylvia says that's another thing she's having fun with, but Korob says again she's a traitor. This goes on for a while. Well, Kirk and the Ambien trio slide in, and Sylvia sends Korob and the boys out so she can talk to Kirk alone. She tells him that he and the rest of the humans have knowledge she lacks, but she has power that he lacks. So together, what do you say? Then she tells Kirk to tell her what power feels like. And Kirk's got a Kirk. So he decides to show her what all kinds of stuff feels like. She stops just short of saying, show me this earth thing called kissing, but she offers Kirk a joining of the minds. They'd share their knowledge, apparently. Kirk could learn a bunch of stuff, and she'd learn stuff too. They'd learn the crap out of each other is what I'm saying here. I should point out that Korob is watching all of this from behind a decorative wall, the pervert. Sylvia demonstrates to Kirk that she's got different outfits and wigs if he's into that kind of thing. He's Jim Kirk, though, so he says he'd just rather suck face. As he's kissing her and weirdly kind of rubbing his face on her, he starts asking her questions about the nature of their power. She reveals that it's all focused through the transmuter. But there comes a time in every ill-fated relationship where one of them mind reads the other and finds out that they're just with you to get to your transmuter. Sylvia can't believe that Kirk wasn't really in love with her, nor did he want to rule the galaxy with her. Somewhere in the depths of Tantalus Penal Colony, Lenore Caridian goes, "See, this is what I'm talking about." Sylvia accuses Kirk of using her, and he says, "Yeah, like you've been using us. Sucks, don't it?" Well, just then, the zombie squad walks in and marches Kirk out as Sylvia is vowing revenge on Kirk's ass, his ship, and his whole friggin' planet. Hell truly hath no fury like a woman kirked. On the ship, Chekhov is making some progress on the force field. DeSalle says it's starting to weaken. Down in the dungeon, Cora busts in and says, "Dude, that was awesome. She is so pissed. By the way, I took your ship out of the plastic, even though they were about to bust out anyway. It's tough to control so much stuff at once, you know, your boys, the ship, the friggin' castle." He releases Kirk and Spock and gives them back their communicators and phasers and tells them they gotta haul ass. Kirk ain't leaving without his boys, though. Korob says that ain't happening. They belong to Sylvia now, and she's gone full-blown crazy with all the new emotions and sensations and whatnot of being a human-type person. He leads them out of the dungeon, and it turns out Sylvia has turned back into a cat, but it's friggin' huge now. Kirk says, "What is with the cat thing?" Spock says he's done a lot of research on this, and cats are ruthless and terrifying, and they hate Mondays. It's kind of the perfect choice when you think about it. Well, they hide in that room they fell into at the beginning of the episode, and there's still a big-ass hole in the ceiling. Kirk boots Spock up the hole, and as Kirk's about to go up too, the cat shows up at the door, and Korob tries to spray it with a water bottle, but the cat knocks the door in and squashes Korob underneath it. Kirk checks on him and sees that he's dropped his light bulb stick, so he yoinks it and runs back to the hole. He tosses it up to Spock and then jumps up after it. As he's getting his bearings, McCoy shows up with a mace and tries to beat Kirk to death with it. Scotty does the same thing with Spock. When Kirk knocks Bones out, Sulu shows up and uses some totally accurate and very well-trained Asian fighting moves. Who choreographed this? Ed Gruberman? Well, Kirk slings old Sho Kasuki over here into the wall and he's knocked out cold. As Kirk is admiring his victory, McCoy gets up and is about to brain Kirk, but Kirk punches him out in a move we are very much going to talk about later. Well, the cat has made it up the stairs, so Kirk grabs the light bulb stick and tells the cat, "Hey, I got your transmuter." The cat changes back into Sylvia, and as she reaches for the stick, Spock tells Kirk not to let her touch the stick. So she touches her necklace instead, and she and Kirk teleport back into the dining room. Kirk says, "What, this again?" Sylvia says that the stick is just an amplifier, and that her mind is the source of the power, and she renews her whole rule the galaxy offer. She says she needs the dreams and ambitions and imagination of a guy like him, so come on, what do you say? Kirk ain't going for it, so Sylvia pulls out a phaser and demands the stick. Kirk says, "You want the stick? Stick this," and smashes it against the table. There's a few frames of all white, and suddenly Kirk is standing on the surface of the planet. No castle or nothing. Spock walks up with McCoy, Scotty, and Sulu, all looking very confused. It looks like everything is gone, but on the ground in front of the boys is, two of what I can only describe as arts and crafts projects making lizard noises and slowly dying. Korob and Sylvia, as they truly are, apparently. They croak, Kirk calls for a beam-up, and we roll credits. Great stuff. This is going to be a short section. There are some lines I like in this thing.
Spock. Comment.
Very bad poetry, Captain.
A more useful comment, Mr. Spock.
The universe smiles when Spock brings the snark.
Maybe we can't break it, but I'll bet you credits to Navy beans we can put a dent in it.
Now, if you've watched this show for a while, you know I hate it when we take a common phrase and future it up. Mainly because usually to do that, they have to add so many syllables that it makes the phrase all cumbersome and awkward. Like in Armageddon when Scotty says the only diplomat he knows is a, quote, fully activated phaser bank. Now, the best diplomat is a gun or is a rifle or something isn't a direct quote or a well-known colloquialism, but the sentiment is not a new one, and futuring it up still made it awkward. But this one, I'm going to give a pass to, and I'll tell you why. DeSalle is probably the first Starfleet officer we've seen who really feels like the stereotypical serviceman from the 60s that we see in movies and TV shows of the period that are about the 40s war or something like that, you know? Can't you just see this guy in khakis serving on the ship and in harm's way or flying a plane in Black Sheep Squadron or something? So credits to Navy Beans just kind of sounds right coming from this guy. And it's a shame that this is the last time we see DeSalle. They made him the assistant chief engineer because they noted that Kirk and Spock have to leave the ship a lot and Scotty's in charge them times, so they wanted to have DeSalle in engineering while Scotty's running the ship. But they also noticed that when Kirk and Spock are gone and Scotty's on the bridge, stuff don't really happen in engineering much, because the main focus at those times tends to be whatever's happening on the planet. So they weren't really going to need DeSalle. So he went from recurring character to let go completely in record time. Also, yeah, credits. But we'll have to tackle the fact that Starfleet definitely does still use money in another video. And I will say that I like Antoinette Bauer and Theo Marcuse's performances here. They had some really weird material they had to work with, and I think they did a really good job with it. So just know that I ain't digging on them when I talk about the Goof. Woof. How long you got? Well, for openers, let's talk about this. Now, we're going to talk about the guy underneath this later, but right now, we're going to focus our attention right here. Now, it's not as bad as Lazarus's beard, which is an excellent band name, by the way, but Chekhov's wig is still distractingly bad. Also, Chekhov's wig sounds like a rule of playwriting, where if a wig is shown in the first act, then it needs to come off in a hilarious Three Stooges scenario by the third act. They did not follow that rule in this episode, and I think the episode suffers for it. Also, Chekhov's wig is a good band name too. But more on Pavel Andreevich later. Next, are you freaking kidding me with this? Now, the effects in general in this episode get a lot of flack, but I'm going to say that as goofy an episode as this is, most of the effects actually work pretty well. Even the witches in the turtlenecks worked well at the time. We've talked before about how HD ain't doing these old shows any favors, and the contrast back then actually covered up those turtlenecks much better by all accounts. But even by the time we got to the 90s, video fidelity was such that the effect fell apart, and they all looked like they shopped at Forever Steve Jobs over here. But whose third grade class put these things together? And they've digitally removed them in the remastered versions, but before that, you could see the black strings used to marionette Korob and Sylvia through the whole dying process, even going slack when they finally croaked. After all the fog effects, the windstorm thing, the castle sets, the enlarged cat thing, which actually was pretty good for the time and budget constraints, this felt like somebody woke up on the day they were going to shoot this scene and realized that they had forgotten to make the aliens. Then probably Matt Jeffries, being the MacGyver extraordinaire that he was like, quick, bring me some pipe cleaners and hit the Red Lobster next door for some crawfish, some calamari, and 2 cocktail onions, and then grab me a handful of weeds from out in the yard. Boom, done. This episode went way over budget, but it's pretty clear what wasn't to blame for that. Bit of trivia for you. Them noises they make, that's the sound of freshly hatched alligators calling for their mothers. Kinda cute. And then there's this. What is up with the fighting in this episode? It's atrocious. Now, I ain't saying Star Trek is known for Yun Wo Ping level fight choreography, but it's usually better than this. I can't find anywhere that there were stuntmen or fight director strikes during this time, so what the hell is going on here? I mean, look at this. There are community theaters in Sheboygan that stage more convincing fights than this. But the main goof is the episode itself. It's extremely weirdly paced. The middle chunk is boring conversations leading to other boring conversations where people say the same things over and over. Tell us about your science. No, tell us about your science. No. Tell us about your science. Shut up. Punctuated by trip after trip to the friggin' dungeon. Sulu and Scotty are in the episode, but Sulu doesn't have any lines but aha when he pulls out the 60s TV generic Asian fighting style, which is pretty problematic goof in and of itself. And Scotty just says, it was all an illusion at the very end. That's it. Easiest paychecks those two ever earned. And honestly, this feels like another attempt at the cage. Humans held prisoner by aliens with powerful minds, subjected to illusions and studied, and ultimately needed in order for the aliens to... Well, they don't really say what they're trying to do they? Sylvia mentions ruling the place with Kirk, but what was Korob's beef about a duty to the old ones? A duty to do what? And are these the same old ones from Robert Bloch's other script, What Are Little Girls Made Of? I think the idea was some sort of prelude to invasion, but that's just a guess. They don't actually say what the hell these dingleberries want. And the icing on the steaming pile of cake is that the solution the whole time was just busting the light bulb stick. Really? Nobody got outsmarted. There wasn't a battle of wills or thinking their way out of the problem a la Corbomite. Just snatch Korob's stick and whack it on the table. That's your resolution. And it's something they could have done all the way back at the beginning of Act 2. That's it. I'm calling it now.
Aha!
Ruminations. So those of you what ain't familiar with the fact that we take these episodes in production order rather than release order might be wondering why we're doing this one first when it's the 7th episode of Season 2. Well, they produced this one first, but wanted to wait until the week leading up to Halloween to release it. Go figure. Making this the only actually official Star Trek holiday special. Hey, at least we didn't get Mark Hamill in stunning eye makeup and an elderly Wookiee watching video porn, right? Could have been worse. I mean, I think that you could easily do a horror story in the Star Trek universe, and some of the stuff they've already done would qualify as that, hands down. We've had stories in the same vein as Alien, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, slasher pictures. Hell, even the original series has way more successful attempts at horror in Devil in the Dark, The Man Trap, and Robert Bloch's third script, Wolf in the Fold. So it's doable for sure. So why does this episode feel like it should have Abbott and Costello in it? Nah, we've been all over this. Forget it, Possum Rob, it's Catspaw. Moving on to a much more pleasant topic, Walter Koenig as Ensign Chekhov. Now, it's pretty common knowledge by now that he was brought on board to make the show appeal to a younger audience by tapping into the popularity of Davy Jones from the Monkees. But unlike our boy from the Prefab Four, instead of English, Pavel would end up being Russian. But did you know where the idea to make him Russian instead of English came from? Well, according to legend, it was Russia itself. Well, more accurately, the Soviet Union. Soviet newspaper Pravda apparently published an article about Star Trek, and in it, they called it typically capitalistic and asked why in this tapestry of nations that is the Star Trek cast, there is no one of Russian descent. Ain't we doing pretty good in this whole space race thing, they asked? Where's our guy? Well, Roddenberry liked that idea, so instead of English, which had been the plan, they went with Russian instead. The Cold War was going strong at the time, and Gene liked the idea of showing members of nationalities once on opposing sides of philosophical and doctrinal conflicts being shown working together to bring about a better future. What's more Star Trek than that? And I said according to legend because this is all according to Gene Roddenberry. But some researchers tried to find this Pravda article for the 20th anniversary, and they couldn't find any evidence that it ever existed. Roddenberry said that he could be misremembering and it came from a discussion he had with a Russian journalist or something. Koenig says it was a complete fabrication by the studio's publicity department, making crap up to serve the publicity of Star Trek. What's more Gene Roddenberry than that? So this is the very first episode of the second season of Star Trek produced, and we do have some interesting changes. There's a new version of the main theme, which fills out the sound a good bit. The beginning and ending credits, as well as the episode title, are all in the Trek font now, and contracts have been renegotiated. Like, we now see DeForest Kelley's name in the opening credits. And related to these renegotiations, we're also starting to see not only an increase in tension between William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy due to the latter's increasing popularity, but also between Nimoy and the production staff, mainly Gene himself, since as part of Nimoy's new contract, he was given far greater script input. Remember when Spock disappeared on the way to the transporter room at the beginning of the episode? Stuff like that was starting to happen, where the writers would just kind of forget that Spock existed. Suddenly he's in a scene, but for some reason don't have much to say, or they'd write stuff for him that Nimoy considered inauthentic or demeaning. Now, was this Roddenberry directing his writers to minimize Spock because he didn't like the character overshadowing his heroic captain? Who can say? A lot of these writers and producers were like, hey, it's a TV show. Just show up, say your lines, and get paid. This ain't Shakespeare over here. But Nimoy felt very protective of this character he created, hence why he had the greater script input clause added to his contract. Writers love when a non-writer has authority over their work, let me tell you. And it's worth pointing out that producer Bob Justman agreed with Nimoy on this and would often intercede on his behalf with Roddenberry. Incidentally, the disappearing Spock in this episode was allowed to happen only because since they shoot things out of order so much, Nimoy didn't even notice the discrepancy until after he saw the finished product. He'd have pointed it out if he had seen it sooner. But none of that is what started the tensions between him and the Shat. That was much simpler. Spock was becoming more popular than Kirk. Now, this was already becoming evident by the fan mail coming in, which NBC noticed too, which caused them to request that there be more Spock-centered, or at least Spock-heavy episodes made. And it didn't help that an article appeared in TV Guide on April 29th of 1969 by one Dr. Isaac Asimov, titled, Mr. Spock is Dreamy. For there to be an article in TV Guide, which practically everybody got at the time, by one of the planet's premier science fiction authors in his heyday, that is all about how Mr. Spock is making intelligence sexy and how all the women are swooning over his brain, and there not even being a hint of a mention of Captain Kirk or William Shatner anywhere in the article, well, how do you think that went over? Of course, this is all just scratching the surface of the dysfunctional craziness going on behind the scenes at Star Trek, and it'll probably come up again here and there, but we're gonna leave it alone for now before it drives me friggin' nuts. So there you have it, Catspaw. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode. For me, it was goofy, but I find I can't bring myself to hate it. I also can't bring myself to watch it either unless I'm doing a show about it, so there is that. So okay, trying to get this part shorter, so please like the video if you dug it, please subscribe if you ain't done that already, and if you want to sling some quatloos our way, we got channel memberships and the merch store at adstudiosmerch.com. But most of all, thank you so much for watching. You guys are the best. Next time, what happens when a dude is stranded by himself on a planet for 150 years? If you said he starts dating a gas cloud, tune in next time and see if you're right as we take a look at Metamorphosis. Until then, possum friends are awesome friends. Take it easy, all right? Later.
Hey!